good way to see if you are able to put all this together. And then on Tuesday of next week, we will review and then take the final on Thursday, and then you will be done with this course. And then you can go off and do whatever happy career you happen to have after this. But again, that is what we have coming up. If you've not turned things in, if you've not gotten some of your lab things turned in, May 6th, the last day of classes is back Monday. Anything that's not into me by then is too late. So again, last day of classes, not next Monday, but the Monday after that. Is the last day. I will have to turn in final grades Tuesday after that. So again, I do have to turn in final grades 48 hours after the end of class, so I have to get things in. All right, having said that, let's go ahead and look for one more lab quiz, by the way. Probably will show up on Thursday. Probably Thursday. But in advance, maybe it'll be there tomorrow. Let's start by going over one more time the female reproductive cycle. Because again, it's complicated and we can't go over this too many times. So once again, it all begins here at the beginning of the menstrual cycle with the menstrual flow. That defines day 1, and that menstrual flow is due to the fact that we don't have estrogen and we don't have progesterone. Without estrogen and progesterone, we are unable to maintain the uterine lining, and it sloughs off, creating the menstrual flow. Without the inhibin, FSH levels start to rise. With the rise in FSH, we start to see follicular development. Again, it will be a number of follicles beginning their development with that rise in FSH. Only one will go to completion. Only one will go to maturity between the two ovaries. But as that follicle grows and develops, it starts out as a primordial follicle, which has been sitting around since before birth. Turns into a primary follicle where the wall gets nice and thick and starts producing estrogen, starts making inhibin as well. The inhibin turns off the FSH. As that follicle continues to grow, it then turns into a secondary follicle as it begins to fill with fluid. Again, as soon as it starts getting fluid filling up inside of there, it becomes a secondary follicle. It continues to grow and develop and becomes a large, mature or Graafian follicle, or a tertiary follicle eventually, and continues to produce inhibin, which turns off all the other follicles, keeps them from progressing along their path. Those that did not go to maturity degrade and are lost. Those will be degraded and are lost. The estrogen here then combines with the GnRH in a positive feedback mechanism that leads to a large surge in LH. By the way, that estrogen causes the growth and development of the uterine lining, getting it ready to accept an incoming embryo. With that big surge in LH, we get ovulation. The follicle bursts open and the secondary oocyte comes out. Remember, at this point, we are in meiosis 2. We're in meiosis 2, specifically metaphase of meiosis 2, as that egg comes out. It carries along with it some of the follicular cells in what is known as the corona radiata. The remains of the follicle, under the influence of LH, then begins to thicken, turn yellow, and now start producing, in addition to the estrogen, progesterone as well. Progesterone switches us into the secretory phase here inside the uterus, and the uterine glands are now producing substances to keep that embryo happy and healthy when it does arrive. So long as the corpus luteus remains, we remain in this secretory phase, so long as we have the LH there to keep that going. But again, if implantation occurs, it's going to occur right about here, about 7 days or so following the ovulation. That is when implantation will occur, right around here. And if that occurs correctly, we will continue this until the end of pregnancy. If that does not occur, the corpus luteum gets up. Corpus luteum gets up and begins to degrade. As the corpus luteum begins to degrade, it turns into the corpus albicans instead. And the corpus and now stops making progesterone, stops making inhibin, stops making estrogen, we are no longer able to maintain the uterine lining, and we go back to the beginning again and start over. So again, that is the female reproductive cycle. Again, it takes about 28 days, some variation within those 28 days from person to person and from cycle to cycle. Any questions on the female reproductive cycle at this point? We've gone over it several times, so keep looking at it. Because there will be multiple questions on an exam about it. Last time, we were talking about what happens with the development once pregnancy does occur. And again, we start in what is known as the embryonic phase and then move into the fetal phase. Big difference between the embryonic phase and the fetal phase. An embryo doesn't look particularly human, a fetus does. Again, the switch from embryo to fetus varies a little bit depending on who you ask. But it's typically around 3 months of pregnancy, about the end of the first trimester, is when we switch from being an embryo into being a fetus. What the big major event that occurs there is that the corpus luteum gets up. We lose the corpus luteum, and then the placenta has to take over producing those same hormones that we were getting from the corpus luteum. Again, those hormones are again LH and FSH, not FSH, LH and progesterone and estrogen need to be produced by the placenta in order to maintain the pregnancy. So again, it's up to the placenta to maintain the pregnancy. We will continue growing and developing from that point on. And again, I forget exactly where we ended up last time. But again, one of the big events that has to occur early on about 2 weeks in, is gastrulation. Gastrulation leads to formation of 3 distinct layers: the mesoderm, the endoderm, and the ectoderm. Again, the ectoderm is on the side of the amnion, the mesoderm is in the middle, and the endoderm is on the side of the yolk sac. This right here is what is known as the embryonic disc. And we see that we can see infolding of these layers in here, and that forms the mesoderm in the middle. By the time we reach this stage, these cells have differentiated to the point where their fate has already been determined. The cells here inside the mesoderm, these will become the muscle and digestive tract. The ectoderm over here becomes the nervous system and the skin. The endoderm over here, becomes the respiratory tract and whatever else is left over for the endoderm here. But anyway, the endoderm becomes the digestive tract and basically the internal organs through there. But by this point, we have determined the fate of all of these cells into which cell lineage they will thrive. To the point where if we were to take an endoderm cell and put it out into the ectoderm, it would still become, for instance, a liver cell, or whatever it is that is decided to go on. Again, there's a nice table in the book that shows you all of this. As we continue developing, by week 2, you'll notice we've started to form our umbilical cord over here. We've continued to grow and develop. We now have a nice yolk sac forming on one side. We see the beginning of the amniotic cavity there on the other side. And we're starting to look more like something's going to happen in here. 2 weeks in, it looks something like this. And we see the formation of what is known as the neural tube. The neural tube is what's forming right through here. This will become the central nervous system. The somites over here, these will eventually become the limbs. This is the head up here, this will become the brain. This is the tail down on the other end. Again, at this point, it doesn't look like a whole lot. We continue growing beyond that. By week 3, we look something like this. We're beginning to be able to tell more easily which end is the head, which end is the tail. By week 4, it's getting even bigger still, and by week 4, it looks something like this. Again, clearly still in the embryonic stage. If I were to show a picture of a dog embryo, it would look essentially the same thing. Or a fish embryo looks essentially like this. We can see a few things here. Here in red, that's going to be the heart. The heart forms very early. The heart forms is one of the first organs to form. Here's our yolk sac hanging out over here. Again, this is the beginnings of the brain over here. I think this is probably the eye, although it might be this. But again, it's a little hard to tell exactly what is going on at this point. By week 5, it's gotten quite a bit bigger. And you can see now the beginnings of the placenta beginning to form over here. So again, what we're seeing out here is the chorion. This layer hanging out here, this is the chorion. This is the amniotic sac over here. Here's our yolk sac. And over here, this is the allantois, again, a waste disposal site. And we're now getting these sort of fingered-like projections sticking out. Those are called chorionic villi. And those are going to reach into the maternal blood supply and pick up nutrition for our developing embryo at this point. And again, this will continue to further grow and develop into the placenta. By week 10 or so, we're starting to switch from an embryo into more of a fetal stage. It's now starting to look vaguely human. We now have the placenta forming up fairly well here. Our umbilical cord has formed across here. We can see here's our yolk sac hanging down over here. It will eventually be absorbed into the gut. And at this point, we are now able to get nutrition from the mother more directly than we were previously. Because these chorionic villi hanging out, all this space out here on the outside, that is called a lacunae, and it's filled with blood. That's filled with the maternal blood supply. That maternal blood supply is being supplied by the spiral arteries coming into the uterus that we looked at earlier. And we're going to continue to grow and develop. This placenta will continue to grow and develop as well. And again, from this point on, we're basically just getting bigger and continuing to develop our organs to where they can actually survive outside without the maternal help here. And again, depending on what you happen to be, different organs develop at widely different rates. So different organs develop at widely different rates. And again, we have this table in your book, which unfortunately does not fit all onto a single slide here. But you can see here in the first 5 months here, we've actually done a pretty good job of starting to form our skin here. We're starting to see keratin production here by the middle of the pregnancy. The skeletal system, we are not quite to the point where we actually have bones yet, but we do have cartilage sitting there, ready to begin its ossification into bone. The muscular system has started to develop, and we're starting to get movement occurring by about the end of the first trimester is when movement starts to occur. That's around 22 weeks or so. The nervous system, we are still trying to grow it. Again, the brain takes a very long time to grow. We have the basic structures being laid down, but they're not myelinated yet, so they're not really ready to do anything. We start getting some of our special organs forming here. Again, the eyes and ears form fairly early on. Taste buds are beginning to work here. We're getting our basic structures forming here. Other things happening. The endocrine system is just starting out. It will actually develop later. The heartbeat starts very early on. By the way, what people describe as when they can first see the heartbeat is actually just the cells beginning to beat. The cells start to beat at about 6 weeks or so, a couple of weeks in. But there's not really a heart yet. It hasn't really formed into a heart yet. But we do see some beating cells beginning to beat inside of it. The cardiocytes are starting to develop. To get to our basic heart structure actually takes a couple of months for us to actually get to where we actually have a heart. But you can detect that electrical activity from the beginning of the beating of the cardiocytes. Pretty early on, because again, we need to be able to get blood pumping through the system really early on. The respiratory system doesn't really start. The respiratory system develops late, because again, we don't use it. Digestive system, we're getting the GI tract forming out here. We're getting things like the gallbladder, the pancreas, the liver being formed inside of here. But again, they're not really going to be used until after birth. Same with the urinary system. The reproductive system, this is when we make our oogonia. At the end of the first trimester. So again, we separate that germline really early on. is when that development occurs. In the second half of pregnancy, we finish everything up. Again, our skin finishes becoming skin. Basically, at the beginning of the third trimester, we have actual skin. The skeletal system, again, mainly cartilage until into the third trimester. We don't have actual bone until fairly late, because again, we're still growing very rapidly. Again, in the muscular system, we've got most of our muscles built up, but they're not very big, and they're just continuing to grow and get bigger as we reach maturity. Here, the nervous system, we're still laying everything down. Myelination will not be completed until after birth. In fact, if you take an infant, there's something called Babinski sign. If you draw a probe along the bottom of the foot, it causes the toes to splay apart. In the adults, it should do the opposite. And that's because we don't have myelination yet. The peripheral cells aren't fully myelinated until sometime after birth. We are going to continue forming all this, not only during the development, but after development as well. The brain and nervous system will continue to develop. We start seeing our functionality here in the special senses, again, fairly late. Other things happen even later. The cardiovascular system, just before birth, we have to turn off the structures that was shunting things away from the lungs and get blood flowing to the lungs. Again, that occurs at or just before birth. We can start making our, surfactant very late, and again, we don't finish our lungs up until quite late as well. The digestive system is actually occurs fairly early on. We don't really get our full kidney formation until quite late as well, because again, we're not using it until after birth. And then the reproductive system, during the third trimester here, we have the descent of the gonads from by the kidneys down to where the final location is. And again, it does take a few months for that actually to occur. But again, the whole point of all of this is different organ systems develop at very different rates. Largely having to do with, do you need them in the fetal state or not? Cardiovascular system, you need, it occurs very early on. Urinary system, respiratory system, we don't need until we're actually born, they develop late. So again, different organ systems develop at widely different rates. The nervous system takes a really long time to make, so it takes a really long time. It's one of the first things to start, and it's not completed until after birth. All right, so that is what is going on during the pregnancy. After about 9.5 months, almost 10 months, we are actually ready to be born. And during this time, we are producing our placenta. Again, it takes about 3 months to grow a placenta here. And the placenta has several parts to it. First of all, it has a maternal side, which is over here, and it has a fetal side, which is over here. And what we can see is here's our umbilical cord coming in here, and we see the umbilical vein in red, the umbilical arteries in blue. Why? Because again, arteries carry blood away from the heart, veins carry blood towards the heart, so this is similar to the pulmonary system. The arteries are carrying deoxygenated blood from the heart out to the placenta, where we'll then pick up oxygen, and the veins will carry that red oxygenated blood back in towards the heart. And out here at the placenta, we have these sort of tree-like structures here. Again, these are known as chorionic villi. This is the fetal side of it. And the fetal blood supply comes into here, and it is surrounded by these big open pools of blood. Those open pools of blood are called lacunae, and that's on the maternal side. Feeding blood into it, we have the maternal blood vessels coming in and feeding the blood into these lacunae. As the blood is coming in, we got nice oxygenated blood coming in. The chorionic villi here are picking up the oxygen, picking up the nutrients, and sending them into the fetus, taking the waste products from the fetus, putting it into this blood supply, and then the veins carry it away. You will note, though, there is a barrier between the maternal blood supply and the fetal blood supply. Those two blood supplies should remain separate throughout the entire pregnancy. Under normal circumstances, there is no mixing of the maternal and the fetal blood. And this is important. Why? because that fetus may have a totally different blood type. Again, the fetus may have a completely different blood type from the mother, so we cannot have the mixing of these two blood supplies. So they are kept separate. However, most things that are required, things like oxygen, carbon dioxide, they cross blood these barriers very easily. They cross these blood barriers. Other things like glucose and some of the amino acids, they need to be using active transport or facilitated diffusion to get them across, depending on what they happen to be. All right. And to maintain all of this requires a number of hormones. First of all, we have HCG. HCG mimics LH. HCG is human chorionic gonadotropin. Human chorionic gonadotropin is initially produced by the embryo, and that is how the mother's body knows that there is a pregnancy occurring. And the HCG maintains the corpus luteum during the first portion of pregnancy until the placenta can take over. Again, this is what is being used to test whether or not the mother is pregnant. If you take a home pregnancy test, it is testing for HCG. It's testing for that. As the placenta begins to develop, it starts to take over production of estrogen and progesterone, and then we don't need the corpus luteum anymore. After about 3 months, the corpus luteum is no longer going to be functional, and you're now reliant on the placenta to produce the estrogen and the progesterone required to maintain the pregnancy. This switch occurs at the end of the first trimester. If the placenta does not start making these hormones correctly, pregnancy fails. Pregnancy fails at that point. And that is, again, why many people choose not to reveal pregnancy until the end of the first trimester. Because this is one of the places where things go horribly wrong. It's the placenta does not always take over correctly. But if you get past this point, chances are you will go to term. Chances are you will go to term. The probability of getting to this point is only about 30%. Again, 70% or so of all pregnancies fail. Again, most pregnancies do not go to term. We humans are not particularly good at reproduction. And that's most of the time it fails. Most of the time it fails. So again, congratulations, so I'll be the odds. You made it. Feel good about that. So again, maintaining pregnancy is difficult. All right, but if you do get it past the first trimester, chances are, unless there's some horrible mutation occurring inside of there, chances are you will make it to term after that point. There are some additional hormones being produced by the placenta. In addition to the HCG, the estrogen, and the progesterone, we also make HPL, human placental lactogen. This is going to be used to get the mammary glands ready to make milk. So again, this is going to prepare the mammary glands for milk production, cause them to enlarge, and basically get ready to make milk. Again, milk production itself will not occur until after birth because the progesterone prevents it. Progesterone does block milk production itself. We'll also be producing what is called relaxin. Relaxin is very important in that it softens up the joints. Particularly, it softens up the pubic symphysis and makes it more flexible. Again, this is going to be important during childbirth itself. So again, it increases the flexibility of the pubic symphysis so we can spread it apart a little bit more easily. It will help to dilate the cervix, and it keeps oxytocin from being produced. Why do we need to block oxytocin? Because oxytocin is the hormone responsible for labor. As oxytocin levels rise, it causes contraction of the uterus, which leads to childbirth. So we want to keep the oxytocin turned off until it is time for childbirth to occur. Again, this is all what is happening within the placenta and the developing fetus. The mother also needs to have some things happen as well. There are some maternal adaptations that have to occur. First of all, that fetus is growing very rapidly. It is using a lot of oxygen. We need to increase our oxygen supply in the maternal supply. So we need more oxygen coming in, and to get more oxygen, we need more blood. So the blood supply goes up. The placental circulation diverts the blood from the maternal side, so we need to replace that. And there are increased metabolic needs. During fetal development, that is the fastest growth you will ever see within a human body. Occurs during that period, which means it requires a lot of nutrition going in there, which means we need blood to get it there. So again, the blood volume can increase up to 50%. We need increased nutritional requirements because again, that fetus is growing very rapidly and eating a lot of calories in the process. We need 10 to 30% more nutrition occurring, which is less than some women like to increase their food intake by. But again, you do need to increase the nutritional requirements. You will be gaining weight during pregnancy. Again, like 15, 20 pounds maybe, not 50. But again, some women use it as an excuse to gain a lot of weight. And again, those increased nutritional needs are greater later during the pregnancy than they are at the beginning of the pregnancy. The fetus is producing a lot of waste products during this time as well, so the GFR has to go up. The maternal GFR has to go up because of that increased blood volume, and we also have fetal waste we now have to get rid of as well. So the mother's kidneys are working for both her and the fetus. And the mammary glands need to be prepared for pregnancy to occur. So again, there are lots of things happening during that pregnancy. Again, at 16 weeks, the fetus is still pretty small. And you're not really going to see much happening from the outside. Because again, that uterus is just starting to expand at this point. Again, 16 weeks, that's towards the end of the first trimester. Actually, it's past the trimester. And now this is about the time when this fetus is going to start kicking. You start to be able to feel the movements occurring around this time. And it's going to continue to grow and expand and stretch everything out in here. At this point, you can see it's still down there in the pelvis. But at the end of pregnancy, it's going to get a lot bigger. And as that fetus grows and expands, the uterus, first of all, has to grow and expand to encase it. You can see we have our nice placenta hanging out over here. And we're now bulging out quite a bit. And in addition to that, all those wonderful organs that we'd like to keep in our abdomen, we don't have room for anymore. And it all gets pushed up and out of the way. Which is why we don't recommend that pregnant women run marathons, because it's very difficult to get enough oxygen at this point. Again, as we are pushing that, the intestines, the liver, everything is pushing up against the diaphragm, making it more difficult to take a really deep breath. So again, it does make it more difficult to breathe in here. The bladder down here is going to be squished. As well, which is again why pregnant women spend a lot of time in the bathroom. And balance is going to get thrown off. Again, number one, we put this big extra weight here in the front, which is not where we normally have our center of balance at. And number two, we made the joints looser. The joints are not as stable anymore because we've loosened them up to allow childbirth to occur. So at the end of pregnancy here, best thing to do is not get that's not the time to start a new exercise regime. You should continue whatever exercise you can, because again, you want to stay healthy. But this is not the time to start a new Pilates regime, because the body just isn't ready for that. But anyway, that's what happens to the mother. And then, at the end of pregnancy, we have parturition, which is a fancy word for childbirth. Parturition, that's labor. This is initiated by the fetus, by the fact that that fetus is getting great, big, and stretching out that uterus. As that uterus gets really stretched out, it decides it doesn't like it anymore. And towards the end of the 8th month or so, the placenta stops making so much of that progesterone, stops making this much estrogen, And this makes the uterine lining more irritable and less capable of keeping everything together. And it responds by beginning to contract. We start seeing contractions beginning. That stretch and irritation of specifically the cervix stimulates the release of oxytocin. Oxytocin, we've mentioned before, it causes uterine contractions. Where does oxytocin come from?
The hypothalamus, the posterior pituitary.
Posterior pituitary. Posterior pituitary. Again, this is being produced by the posterior pituitary in response to the fact that that uterus has gotten stretched way wide. The cervix is being stretched, and that is leading to a neural signal being delivered up to the brain saying make more oxytocin. And that oxytocin causes the uterus to contract. As the uterus contracts, it pushes the head of the fetus against the cervix. As that head of the fetus pushes against the cervix, what's going to happen is going to cause the cervix to stretch. And that stretch of the cervix is going to lead to more oxytocin being produced. That oxytocin is going to cause the uterus to contract. Contraction of the uterus is going to push the head of the fetus against the cervix, which is going to cause it to stretch more, which is going to lead to more oxytocin being produced, which is going to lead to more uterine contractions. And this is a positive feedback loop. We have this positive feedback loop that as we stretch the cervix more and more, we get more and more oxytocin, leading to bigger and stronger uterine contractions, until finally you get a big enough contraction that you push the infant out. And you deliver the infant. So again, this continues until delivery occurs. Again, this is all initiated by the fact that the uterus basically got stretched out too much. This is why, by the way, if you are giving birth to twins, they are almost always premature. Triplets, even more so. Simply because the cervix just decides this is too much for me. And again, starts this cycle going on. But again, it occurs until delivery occurs. Once the head is out, the rest is easy. Once the head comes out, the rest is easy. Again, the head out is tricky. But anyway, that's how childbirth occurs. And again, if you're going to be giving birth, you will like the fact that this is occurring because it greatly shortens the time of labor. This positive feedback greatly shortens the time of labor. All right, so that's what happens with childbirth. Then you are born. And once you're born, you are now a neonate. A neonate is from birth to 1 month. That's what we refer to as neonatal here. The word natal refers to birth, neo, near, new birth. So you're a newborn. And during this period, you're pretty much helpless. And you are entirely dependent on your parents to keep you alive. So again, for that first month, your job is to eat and poop, essentially, and sleep. Infants sleep a lot. At the end of 1 month, you are no longer a neonate, and you are now an infant. And you during the infancy stage, you are continuing to grow, not as fast as you were earlier, but you're still continuing to grow relatively rapidly. We grow quite rapidly right after birth, not as fast as we did as a fetus. Growth does slow, and it continues to slow down as we get older. But from 1 month to 2 years, we are an infant. We are still largely dependent on our parents, but we are now learning to become more independent. We're learning how to actually control our muscles. If you've ever been around a neonate, they will grab hold of your hair and not let go because they don't know how. And they will have to wait until their muscles fatigue to actually let go. Again, it takes some time to learn how to move our muscles in a way that we can actually control what our bodies do. The ability to walk, stand, all of that, those are the things we have to learn how to do, and we learn through trial and error. At birth, you don't know how to speak. By the time you're 2, you're fairly fluent. Again, if you want to become bilingual, by the way, this is the time to do it. Language skills decrease rapidly at puberty. If you want to learn the second language, learn it as a child. That's when you can learn After 2 years, we become a child. And that occurs from 2 years until you hit puberty. That has been the childhood period, and basically you're just getting bigger. You're learning, you're growing, you're becoming more independent. But your growth, by the way, growth is not a nice uniform thing. It doesn't happen in a nice linear fashion. It goes in spurts. There'll be various growth spurts as you start to get bigger. So again, from 2 years until puberty, that's childhood. And then puberty happens. Puberty, so again, during these stages, we're growing quite rapidly, and our organ systems are becoming more mature, but they're not, we're still children. There are basically the only real differences between boys and girls is in the genitalia. At this point, boys and girls are essentially identical, except in the genitalia region. Then adolescence happens. Adolescence begins with what is known as puberty. Puberty is where you start having the ability to produce eggs and sperm. Puberty is sexual maturation. This occurs depending on individual, anywhere from about age 10 to about 15. Again, it typically occurs a year or two earlier in girls than it does in boys. The exact timing of puberty is not clear what actually controls that. Part of it is environmental. Part of it is genetic. But again, it is highly variable from one individual to the next. Typical age of puberty for girls is 12. For boys, it's more like 13, 14. This is the typical age. About 5th grade. But anyways, puberty occurs due to a large increase in GnRH. Puberty is triggered by a large increase in GnRH. And that leads to big increases in things like estrogen and testosterone, leading to maturity. And then you become an adult, and you stay an adult until you die. In essence, is aging. Aging, by the way, begins as soon as you become an adult. Things start to go downhill. The aging process, we see a lack of, or a decrease in functional ability as we get older. So let's take a little look at a few of these things, starting with the neonate. Again, the neonate, that starts at birth. First thing that you have to do when you are born, you have to take a great big breath and inflate the lungs. Again, that's stage number 1. We need to close the ductus arteriosus and the foramen ovale in the heart if they have not already done so. Again, the foramen ovale typically will have closed shortly before birth, but the ductus arteriosum, that's that becomes the ligamentum arteriosum between the aorta and the pulmonary trunk. These are those cardiovascular changes that have to occur at or before birth. And again, you need to take a nice, great big breath to inflate your lungs so you can breathe. This is aided by the fact that we have started to produce the surfactant. And once we start to breathe, we are now on our way. Again, at birth, our urinary system is not really used to being used yet because we haven't really had to use it yet. And therefore, it's not very good at doing it. And we lose a lot of excess fluid from the urinary system, more so than later on. So the urinary system doesn't really concentrate the urine very well initially. It hasn't set up that nice salt concentration in the medulla yet to draw that fluid back out yet. That takes some time to establish. So again, infants require more fluids per body weight because the kidneys just are not as efficient yet. Also because of the small size, not very good at temperature control. Prior to birth, that wasn't an issue. Everything was always at the same temperature because you were inside the mother's body. You were held at 37 degrees. Once you get born, temperature swings quite a bit, and it takes a while for this to resolve itself. Again, a big part of this is the fact that when you're this big, you have a much higher surface to mass ratio. which means you radiate heat away much more easily than you do as an adult. Again, the bigger you are, the easier it is to maintain your body temperature. They don't have a whole lot of subcutaneous fat at this point. Shortly after birth, they will put on some more fat, subcutaneous fat, and that will act as an insulator. And the metabolic rate is very high. Again, at this period, you are going faster than you will at any point until puberty. So again, they have very high metabolic rates, all of which leads to not great temperature control. If you take the temperature of an infant, it swings up and down quite a bit, and that's normal. That is normal. We don't worry too much about low-grade fevers in infants. This is actually normal. All right. As we continue to grow during infancy and childhood, the body growth is involving a bunch of hormones, including growth hormone, the adrenal steroids, that would be the things like testosterone and estrogen. The thyroid hormone is a big factor in terms of regulating growth, and it is not even. It does go in fits and spurts. It grow, it hold, it grow again, and hold multiple times during childhood. But again, overall, the growth rate slows down as we get older. And as we get larger, it is not a nice, even way that we do that. And then something happens, and we see a big increase in GnRH. And that triggers puberty. Again, what triggers the GnRH to go up is not clear. It is clear that it is happening earlier than it used to. There are some girls who are having their first period at age 8. It's been reported that early. Yes, this is way too soon in my mind.
Diet, like if you eat a lot of chicken?
Diet makes a difference, yes. People with malnourished children do not go into puberty as early. So part of the fact that it's early is the fact that we're eating more. But there's clearly more to it than just that. So again, it's not entirely clear what is going on to produce that big increase in GnRH. And it varies from one person to the next by a fair amount, by years. In addition to increasing more GnRH, the anterior pituitary, again, GnRH is produced by the hypothalamus, and the anterior pituitary becomes more sensitive to it and starts pumping out much more FSH and LH, leading to the first ovarian cycle in the female and sperm production in the male. So again, the gonads also then become more sensitive to the FSH and the LH. They start making the gametes, and they start making those sex hormones. And you go from being boys and girls to men and women over a period of a couple of years. And we see development of those secondary sexual characteristics, very fast increase in growth rate. This is that pubertal growth rate is the fastest growth rate you will have after birth. And at the end of this, we'll have fusion of the epiphyseal plates, and then you will have reach your adult stature, and then you're an adult, physically, not mentally. As we all know, who's ever teenagers. But again, so again, that's what happens, and we do have these hormones. The whole period of adolescence here lasts for several years. And again, these are the teenage years. And again, it all settles down by about the mid-20s. By the time you hit mid-20s or earlier, women reach adulthood faster than men do. Men may continue growing into their 20s. Women usually end in their mid-teens. But again, it all varies depending on who you are. All right, so that's what happens in puberty. You become sexually mature. Your hormones start raging all over the place, and you get things like acne and all that fun stuff that goes along with that. Eventually, it all settles down, and you are now an adult. And that's where most of you are now. You will then remain an adult until something goes so horribly wrong that you die. And leading up to that is what is known as senescence. Senescence is another way of saying aging. We age. This senescence starts basically as soon as you become an adult. We lose elasticity in our skin, which means we get wrinkles. We see a decrease in bone deposition, osteoporosis in other words. this is especially prominent in postmenopausal women. Because again, that estrogen is one of the things that is required to maintain bone health. That big drop you see at menopause leads to an increase in osteoporosis. But everyone does see some loss in bone density as we age. We all do. There's a reduction in sensitivity to many of these hormones. This is, again, particularly acute at menopause in women. Men also see a dropping off of the hormonal levels as well, but it's nothing like we see in women. At menopause estrogen goes from here to here. Men testosterone falls off a few percent per decade. So it's a very slow decline in men. It's a fast decline in women. With that loss of those hormones, many of those hormones are growth factors. It makes it much harder to maintain muscle mass. And again, as we age, we lose some of our motor units. As simply part of the aging process, things get damaged and not replaced. Things happen. We see reduced function of the immune system. Again, at birth, we had a nice, great big thymus. It went away at puberty. And again, that has effects on your immune system. So again, our immune system doesn't work quite as well either. We see slower peristalsis involved in the digestive system. The urinary system doesn't work quite as well either. And the reproductive system falls off with the loss of hormones. So again, eventually everything runs downhill a little bit until something goes so catastrophically wrong that you are no longer able to maintain homeostasis and you die. And then you're done. What happens after that is not this course. So again, that's what happens when we as we get older. So we look forward to this, great. In any event, that is a brief lesson on lifespan of humans. Now, as it turns out, sometimes we don't want to make more humans. So the last thing we need to cover for today is birth control. And again, we don't always want to be producing more people, and we decide that this is something that we don't need to do anymore. And there are two main ways that we can prevent pregnancy from occurring. Number one, we can prevent fertilization in the first place. Keep egg and sperm separated, no pregnancy occurs. Number two, we can prevent implantation. We can allow the zygote to be formed, but not let it attach into the uterus. Again, from a medical standpoint, pregnancy begins with implantation. It's usually what we consider to be pregnancy. Now, how can we do this? Well, the most effective and 100% foolproof form is abstinence. Keep men over here, keep women over here, no babies. There's one big problem with this one. People don't do it. Again, the big problem with all of these, and by the way, the percentages I'm giving here come from Planned Parenthood. And this is if these are used correctly. Use any of these incorrectly, and the values drop a lot. And again, it's 100% effective when used correctly. The problem, of course, is that people don't like to do this. And therefore things fail. Also extremely effective is sterilization. This is a vasectomy in men and tubal ligation in women. By the way, from a surgical standpoint, vasectomy is really easy. Tubal ligation is more difficult. But again, a vasectomy, you take the ductus deferens and you snip it, cauterize the ends, no sperm comes out. There can be enough sperm still inside the male reproductive tract to allow pregnancy for a few weeks after that, by the way. So you do have to be careful for the first month or two following the vasectomy. Tubal ligation, again, same idea. Tie off the tubes, sperm can't get to the egg. Sperm can't make it to the egg. Egg can't make it into the uterus. So again, these again work very, very well. Big problem with these is they're absolutely permanent. These are permanent, so if you want to decide later to have children, you can't. That is especially true in tubal ligation. In some instances, you can reverse a vasectomy, but it's not a very high success rate. To reverse a vasectomy, easiest time is right after the vasectomy was done. You can then tie the two ends back together, not tie, but sew the two ends back together. The longer you wait, if you wait several months, the probability of being able to reconnect to those tubes drops a lot. So it's generally speaking not considered to be reversible. There is some small probability of reversibility there. Did you have a question?
Nope, that was
Okay.
it.
Tubal ligation. If you really want to, you can use IVF, in vitro fertilization, to get around that one. But again, that's a very complicated and painful process. All right. The most common form of birth control that is used is hormonal manipulation. And which hormones are we talking about here? Yes.
Estrogen, progesterone?
Estrogen and progesterone. The bad part of hormonal manipulation is this is all female. This is all dependent on changing the hormones in the female. Again, used correctly, these are all essentially foolproof. Well, I shouldn't say foolproof. These are all very effective forms of birth control, all 99% plus when used correctly. But if you don't take your pills every day, the effectiveness drops quite a bit. And again, we now have a lot of different ways of doing this. Again, probably the most common is the birth control pill. But there are also implants, like, and I don't keep up particularly with the names of these. But these are some of the implants. We have actual rings, the NuvaRing. There's a patch you can wear now. There are some shots you can take. People prepare, that's a shot you get every 3 months or so, I think. Hormonal IUDs, IUDs have hormones in them. All these are very effective and very easily reversed. These are very easily reversed. Stop taking the pill and you will become fertile again. The downside is we are talking changes in the hormones, and that can have some side effects. That can lead to some side effects. Some breast cancers particularly are estrogen dependent, so it can increase the risk of certain kinds of cancers. So if you have a family history of that, that's something to look out for. Also, anytime you're playing around with hormones, there are a host of issues actually. Also used for barrier methods. The nice thing about the barrier methods is top and pair condoms. There are both male, the condom here on the top, that's the male condom, put a latex sheath on the penis. And the nice thing about that, in addition to preventing preventing pregnancy, it also prevents sexually transmitted diseases. So again, even if you're not trying to prevent childbirth, these are a good idea anyway, because it does prevent sexually transmitted diseases if you're going to be promiscuous. So again, it does prevent that. Again, used correctly, very effective. The problem is people don't use them correctly. They have to go on before you do anything else. That's the one first. There are also what are known as female condoms. These go into the vagina instead. And again, they're not as popular, but they are out there. About the same amount of effectiveness, but they're not used as frequently. They're hard to find. Diaphragms. This is basically a little cap that goes over the cervix, keeps the sperm out. Same thing with the cervical cap. It's the same idea, a little bit smaller. So those are barrier methods. By the way, these can all be combined with hormonal methods as well. You can use multiple forms of birth control to increase the effectiveness of all of these. Spermicides. Probably the best of the spermicides is a copper IUD. Copper kills sperm. So again, insert a copper IUD in there, it kills the sperm off as they are trying to get through. An IUD is an intrauterine device. It's a device that is implanted into the uterus that can prevent sperm from getting in there. That's that one. There are spermicidal sponges that can be inserted into the vagina, and spermicides, these are usually foams, same idea, and they kill off the sperm. So these kill sperm. Again, all of these are very highly effective. All of these are very highly effective, and they can be combined using, most people who use it are recommended to use this spermicide normally. Then we have the ones that are not quite as effective, and these are the behavioral methods. Basically, don't have sex during your fertile period, is what these come down to. The problem with all of these, the top one, especially fertility awareness, is actually being aware of when ovulation is occurring. There are fairly easy ways to tell when ovulation happens. Again, there's a change in body temperature that occurs at that point. There's a mucus plug that covers up the cervix. It thins out during ovulation, and you can see that if you have somebody to look. Trying to see that yourself, you have to be a lot more flexible than I am. There are ways of telling when you are ovulating. The problem is your fertile period begins a day before that. Telling somebody that they've ovulated, that's relatively easier. Telling when somebody's going to ovulate the next day, that's really hard. That is really hard. Yes.
So if you mate right after your period, you're not gonna get pregnant no matter what?
Highly unlikely. Highly unlikely, simply because it's not going to be a no site around. But again, that period between ovulation, or between the period and the next ovulation, varies. Again, we told you 14 days. It could be as few as 7. It could be as few as 7. It could be as many as 20. So again, some women do have rock solid periods where they can count on it every single month. Most women, my understanding is that is not the case. So again, period time always the same. So again, it does vary. Again, we can look at the cervical mucus, we can measure the temperature, we can just try to keep track of it. But again, you want to err on the side of being a little bit cautious on this one. And avoid sexual contact during those periods. Again, if you're really good at it, it can be fairly effective. If you're not too good at it, it's not very effective. Breastfeeding. For the first 6 months after giving birth, breastfeeding, lactation will prevent ovulation. Breastfeeding prevents ovulation. But only for a fairly short period of time. So if you're giving birth, have just given birth, and are going to be breastfeeding for a while, and by breastfeeding I mean every few hours. I'm not talking 6 hours apart. We're talking every few hours here. So during that period when if you're breastfeeding, you are not ovulating. But eventually that comes back online. That's only effective for about 6 months. After that, you start ovulating again. And the last one down here is withdrawal. It's exactly what it means. Pulling out before the ejaculation occurs. It's not horribly effective because some sperm can come out before ejaculation. And 2, men don't want to do this. This is not something people want to do. Trust me on this one. This is not something you want to do. And it tends not to be horribly effective simply for that. Because again, it's really hard to do. And finally, we have what is known as the emergency contraception or the morning after pill. This is things like, I forget the name of them. But they're available over the counter. And these are pills that you can take, especially popular among rape victims, and they prevent ovulation. They stop ovulation from occurring. Again, no ovulation, no pregnancy. So what these morning after pills do is they prevent ovulation. The most common ones, they prevent ovulation. If you've already ovulated, they don't work. So again, what these do is they prevent you from ovulating for a few days. All right. And those are different ways of preventing new people from coming into the world. Again, various forms of birth control out there. We have about 15, 20 minutes left. I think this is probably a good place to stop. Again, this is the end of actual new information. for the day next week. We will, continue on, we'll look at a few other things on Thursday. That will essentially be the already seen. Any questions? Yes.
Could you delay menopause then if you took a hormone like estrogen, progesterone, like every day or something?
I've not seen anyone actually do that study to see if taking these long-term birth